this, but I talk with my hands. So. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. My name is Vicki Frost Curl. I am Corey and Chris's mom and Francine Frost's daughter. I'm excited and honored to be here today to share our story. My mother, Francine Frost, disappeared February 16, 1981. I'd like to tell you about her. She was the most private person I've ever known. Quiet, loyal, honest, and honorable. I never heard her yell or raise her voice. She loved vacations in San Francisco, Monterey, Carmel by the Sea, and Hawaii. Her favorite hobby was shopping. She would shop for hours for the perfect item. Sesame Street pajamas for Corey, Star Wars figures, perfect snowsuit. A lot of her gifts were late because if they weren't perfect, they couldn't be sent. She would say it was like Alice in Wonderland, an unbirthday present, an unchristmas present. She grocery shopped the same way, going every few days, always at night when the stores were not crowded. She hand-picked each apple, potato, orange, never bought anything in bulk or by the bag. She knew the code ties for all the freshest bread. An old newspaper article states it perfectly. It would be nothing for her to stand at the lettuce bin, choosing the best head of lettuce for 15 minutes, and then decide to ask the stock boy to bring out one more bin. She was a nurse for an ophthalmologist in Tulsa. He once said she was best suited to being a professional shopper. Her patients loved bringing gifts to her. They brought her candy, ceramic candy dishes, and steaks. I was 23 years old when she disappeared from Skaggs Alpha Beta grocery store parking lot in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Her keys were hanging in the outside door. And it was as though she just vanished. We knew the approximate time because she had left a store 1 mile up the road because it wasn't the freshest of whatever she was looking for. And they had recently installed time-stamp receipts. 1981 was a very unfortunate time to disappear. There was almost no technology. One TV station in Tulsa agreed to run her picture and do a story so that we could ask for help. We hired an attorney, offered a reward. Crime Stoppers ran an article. My dad went to see a psychic, completely out of character for him, but he was desperate to find any answers. There were no clues, no leads, nowhere to start. NCIC was the only system in place, and she was entered in. I was married, lived in Kansas. Corey was 4 years old. We drove to Tulsa once a month to be together for support and try to figure things out. My sister Karen was 19 in college in Illinois. We picked her up from school, and she was never able to return to college. She fell into a depression, and 17 months later, as my sons told you, took her own life, unable to handle the trauma. By the grace of God, we hung on. In the months before my mother's disappearance, I began a spiritual journey and found God. Or I should say, He found me. I also began going to Al-Anon when my husband entered treatment for alcohol addiction. I believe the tools from Al-Anon and my newfound faith helped me enormously in coping. We continued to travel to Oklahoma every month. Chris was born in 1984, and from the moment I saw his red hair, I knew my mother would be so happy. Her grandfather had red hair even at the age of 70. In 1984, my grandmother Frances started a petition in Tulsa attempting to start a missing persons bureau at the Tulsa Police Department. She never felt enough was done to find her daughter. The headline of one article read, "Police balk at Bureau on Missing." At the time of her disappearance, the Juvenile Division handled missing persons. There were no computers, no cable TV, no cell phones, and no internet. We depended solely on TV reports and read newspapers, following any serial killers who may have been in Oklahoma when she went missing. I contacted the Oprah Winfrey Show in hopes of spreading her picture and story, and I never heard back. We tried to get on Unsolved Mysteries with the help of a detective in Tulsa, Mike Huff, having several conversations and then nothing. So it was a constant struggle trying to figure out what to do. In the early 1990s, I asked an officer in my hometown to check the status on NCIC, which only law enforcement can do. I was shocked to learn she was not in the system at all. I then called the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation and spoke to Mary Jane Cook. She was the person in charge of missing persons for the state of Oklahoma. She made sure she was entered into NCIC. No one could explain why or how long she had been out of the system. Several years later, I checked again. This time her dental records were not entered. Within hours, Mary Jane had that corrected. I wrote in my notes at that time, she is my angel of sanity. She was my contact person to check whether killers were in prison when we found their names and my mother disappeared. Everything was a dead end. Our first hope came in 2008 when we were contacted to give DNA through a grant from the University of North Texas. My mother's two sisters and I gave DNA, and it was later entered into NamUs. Then it was just a matter of time. Little did we know that in 1983, 23 months after my mother's disappearance, partial skeletal remains were found approximately 60 miles from Tulsa. Clothing description matched, and the autopsy was even performed in Tulsa. There was no connection made. Not one newspaper account has been found yet. The remains were buried in Muskogee as unknown woman in Pauper's Row. To say the system failed my mother and our family is a gross understatement. Thanks to NamUs, a system that actually works, when Angela Berg, a forensic anthropologist for the Oklahoma Medical Examiner's Office, found an autopsy report for the unidentified remains, she entered it into NamUs. That was 2013. Websleuths connected the cases, and Corey told you how he found them. I'm still amazed. So began the process of recovering my mother. Finding the cemetery, there's over 700 cemeteries in Muskogee County. 2 exhumations to locate her remains, and then a 1-year wait for DNA confirmation, which seemed like an incredibly long time until I was able to view the lab today. Thank you, Bruce. And I'm more amazed now. Without Angela Berg, Vernon Martin, the superintendent of Green Hill Cemetery, and Muskogee District Attorney Orville Oach, none of this would have been possible. One of the best days of my life was traveling to Oklahoma with Corey and Chris and picking up my mother's remains and personally bringing her home with us. We celebrated September 16, 2016 with a private gravesite service. We buried my mother's and sister's remains together. Tragically, Vernon Martin from Green Hill Cemetery was killed 10 days after my mother's service, which he attended. Before his death, he had arranged to have a permanent marker placed on the gravesite where my mother had laid for 32 years. I recently heard a statement that everything isn't perfect after our loved one is found. I thought about that for quite a while. Everything isn't perfect, but for me it's 110% better knowing where she is. I do have periods of deep sadness and grief, but I consider these normal feelings, very unlike the turmoil I experienced for 35 years, not knowing. It is very meaningful for me to be here as my mother's remains were here for 1 year. I thank the teams who performed the testing, and they're persisting to not give up when the first test failed. I am currently writing letters to NIJ asking them to reinstate the grant money for DNA testing for the missing and unidentified. Also following Tennessee House Bill number 44 as they attempt to pass a law requiring all states or their state to enter the missing into NamUs within 30 days. They would be the second state to pass this into law. I think this is doable for all states for our missing. I would like to thank you for your kind attention. I'm privileged to be here and happy to speak to anyone who has questions.